Ben, Jonathan, we're looking forward to this conversation today. You know, one of my favorite songs is sung by Zach Brown, Chicken Fry. You know, we need to lift up to those that sacrificed for the things that we loved. And, you know, we love our country. You have men and women have sacrificed tremendously for our great nation. And we just want to say thank you. So Flanders Fields is on the front line here in the U.S., serving those that have served our country, veterans, homeless community. And we're certainly grateful and thankful for Ben, Robert, you guys doing all that you do. Hey, this is going to be a great conversation today. We're on virtually, but we're also on live. And there's a number of folks that are listening. My name is Steve Caliper. I'm in Atlanta. Ben, Robert, we're going to be together later today celebrating this great Veterans Day. But Jonathan, we're excited about your story and how you journeying with Ben and Flanders Fields. And man, we're just excited and appreciate you greatly. So thank you so much. Hey, Ben, let me give the reins over to you. Let me let you share a little bit, if you would, of yourself, just briefly, and the mission of Flanders Fields and why you're doing what you're called to do. Because I know that listeners and those that are online with us today want to hear your heart and why you're waking up every day on mission doing what you do.
Yes, sir. Steve, glad to have you here. Everybody, I'm Ben. I think most of y'all already know me. I used to be a homeless and heroin addicted and alcoholic vet, and we founded Flanders Fields about 1.5 years ago. We've got a mission to help guys like me, and I use that term generically, men and women, find their footing again, find renewed purpose in life, and get their feet back under them. And today we've got Jonathan with us, who is one of Flanders' favorite, I would call him staff, but we're all volunteer. Nobody gets paid. He is I think a 10-time combat veteran, former law enforcement officer, pastor, just an absolutely amazing story this guy has. Jonathan, why don't we kick it off with a little bit about your military background? Let's start there, since it is Veterans Day, and we'll go from there.
All right, man. First off, man, thank you guys for having me on. It's been this has been a great journey getting to know you guys. You know, when I first came on board with Flanders, this was too easy of a mission to jump in on. You know, everything that y'all do, from with the clean living facilities to, you know, the sex trafficking, all that stuff, it just felt right. And, you know, we've established that relationship, so everything's working good. But, you know, I was 22 years, I was actually Air Force. You know, a lot of people, they look at me and they're like, were you Marine? Because I had it. My dad, my biological father, he was a Marine. He did 3 consecutive tours in Vietnam. You know, my uncle already, he was Army. My grandfather was Navy, Korean War vet. And then his grandpa or his dad was World War II vet. And it just, you know, just completely goes down the line. But no, I did 10 deployments, 22 years of service. And it was, you know, it's 22 years. I never give back for anything, you know, for as messed up as it may have caused through all the heartache and on all that stuff. It's, you know, it's pretty much why I do what I do now.
And on that, I want to jump in. Uniform.
I'm sorry, you cut out, man. What'd you say?
What does it mean to you to be a veteran?
Oh, man. You know, if you had asked me that question 10 years ago, it would, you know, I just love this country so much, you know, and to me, what it means is it's living a selfless life. We sacrifice so much and we give up so much, countless hours of sleep, anniversaries, birthdays, holidays, you know, we'll spend overseas. And to me, it's never been about the accolades, ever. You can come into my house and you won't see an I love me wall. I don't have any of my retirement stuff. The only thing I have is a picture of my daughters when I came home from Iraq in 2006, and they're hugging me. That's the only thing that you'll see. I don't claim, like, you'll never hear me say I'm a veteran. I don't use that card. You know, I don't when I'm going through drive-thrus or whatever. To me, it's not about that. It's just about serving this great country and doing it for the freedoms that we do have. You know, I think people don't understand how free this country really is. And unless you've spent some time overseas, you know, through the slums of Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, it doesn't matter. You know, people forget often, and we take for granted the freedoms that we are. So to me, it's just, you know, living a life, and I dedicated my life to this country so that my kids could experience the same freedoms as I got to.
That's beautiful. I love it. And I think that mentality, that selfless service, that's why you have been such a rock star at Flanders. And we're so grateful to have you here. So let's go back to, first of all, what did you do in the Air Force? And tell us about your first deployment, what that looked like.
So I was security forces for a while, and then in security forces, you have combat arms. So I shredded out, became a weapons instructor. I did that for the most of my time. The first deployment was actually to, it was Kosovo in towards the end of 98. And that's when I got addicted. I got addicted to the deployments. You know, it was a fun one. And then once things started to die down, we were in San Vito, Italy, and then, you know, just enjoying the good life. But that's when the addiction started for me, because it was one of those things where it was holy shit, I get to do this. And then and then you're surrounded by these guys. You make these, you know, phenomenal relationships. I still talk to guys that I first deployed with back in 98. So it was, you know, that's why I kept doing it.
Awesome. I'm trying to see if we've got Barat Gagaj watching this. He just texted me. He's a Kosovo war hero and celebrity. I just sent him a link because I know he's going to want to chime in here if he is on. You would love this guy. He lives in Detroit. Hopefully, Robert and I are going to get to see him here in a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
So how long were you in Kosovo? Is it a 9-month deployment?
No, that one was only six months for the first one, because we went in there towards the tail end of things.
Okay. And was that your only deployment until 9/11, or had you deployed more than once when that happened?
So I was deployed during 9/11.
Okay.
Let's see, I went 90, 99 or 98. And then I was deployed again to Saudi in 99, and then back again in 2000, and then again in 2001. Working. I mean, I told you, man, it was an addiction.
I love it.
I couldn't get enough.
Well, and we can have healthy addictions. Obviously, you're aware of that. What was your first GWAT deployment?
Oh, that would have been following 9/11. I was actually deployed during 9/11. I was in Saudi. We were running a search pit when the planes hit the towers. And then when we finished out that deployment, we came back, and then we were sent right back out to Iraq. So I did back to back. And I said that was the first one.
How long were you home in between those two?
Between those two was, I want to say it was three or 4 months.
Oh, wow.
How
old were you at the time?
Oh, man, I was 21. I just
you have any kids 21. Yet?
No.
Okay.
No, they didn't come in until 2006.
Got it. So tell us about your first deployment after you had kids.
That was a rough one. So that was, my daughter was born, she's my oldest, you know, she was born July 1st, and I deployed a month later. During that deployment, we were in Iraq. During that deployment, I lost two of my guys, Staff Sergeant McRoy and Tech Sergeant Jason Norton. They were both hit with an IED. It was a daisy chain. And you know, back then we weren't rolling in the MAT Vs or
right.
up armored. were junk. I mean, we had a lot of soft stuff, but you know, when I got tasked with bringing them home. So I flew back and took them into Dover, and then I flew back out to Alaska where I was stationed at, did the ceremony there, and then I had to go pick them up to their final resting place. My wife at the time met me in Texas where I got charged with burying Brian. He and I were, God, we got to Alaska together. We developed a relationship that that one was a hard relationship to replace. So when my wife met me in Texas, and my daughter at the time was, I want to say, 6 months old, and had no idea who I was.
Oh, man.
I would hold her and she would just cry for mom. And it just, you know, that tore me to pieces. So after the funeral, I had to return and finish out the deployment. So when I got home, finally for good, my daughter didn't know me, and I didn't know her, and it's something that I think has really set the ball in motion for me with my relationships right now with my kids. It's not one that, you know, I don't really openly share too much about what's going on, but I figured what better way than today to do it.
That's
but
right.
It was just, you know, when I get choked up talking about this, but when you get home from a deployment and your kids don't know you, it kind of that kind of burns deep inside, and it's something that that one is not something that you can push down.
That's right.
You know, you can push down the trauma, you can push down the shit that comes with the deployment, but when it comes to your kids, that's the one thing that I can never push down. So my relationship is still continue to struggle because of it.
How did you deal with that in the moment?
Lots of tears. Lots of tears, and I would be up at night questioning myself and why I was continuing to do what I was doing. It was one of those things where, you know, I was already addicted to it, but I hadn't learned how to become a father. And so, you know, it was that my relationship with my daughters, and I felt like I let them down because I didn't have that relationship. And so, you know, I drank and I drank some more and then play with them. But it took almost a year and a half before her and I could even be in the same room alone without her crying for mom.
Oh, man. Alcohol was always one of the great comforters for me until it wasn't. It obviously creates much larger problems, but I think that's something we see a lot of service members use as a coping mechanism because it's familiar, it's common, it's, you know, acceptable. Let's shift the conversation in a full circle kind of way for a second. So your first GWAT deployment, you lost a couple guys to IEDs.
Yeah.
How do you feel now that you know, we've got a good friend, one of our Flanders guys in Ukraine right now, getting rid of IEDs, and we're funding that so that civilians and kids aren't getting blown up.
Yeah, man, I love it. I love it. You know, I've been talking with, I call him Mr. Pink. Because I mean, you got to be nuttier than squirrel shit to go up there and deal with them IEDs and them UXOs. No, man, I love what he's doing, and I'm glad that you bring that up because, you know, for those that you are listening, I've been working with Ben, and Ben, I'm putting together a shirt just specifically for him. I just got the final details from it, and I'm gonna kick it over to Grunt Style so we can get some, get our name, get Flanders out there, and let the world know that Mr. Pink is out there, helping save. Again, it goes back to that selfless act on why we do what we do. I mean, this man, he's going over there representing not only Flanders, but this country, and volunteering to do it. And the pictures that I'm getting back from them, they're insane.
It's no joke.
They really are. But no, man, it goes back to, that's why I kind of fell in love with this mission and what y'all do.
Hey, Ben and Jonathan, let me chime in here with a question. Jonathan, from what I've heard and what my persona is of men and women that serve, when you need to bootstrap it, you do. You're big, you're strong, you're tough, you're bold. You're going into the battle. You're going to go into the fight. But what you expressed today was this soft tenderness of the relationship with your wife and in your daughter. How widespread is that emotion that you experienced with those that serve? How widespread is your story for whether it be active, military, or retired?
Oh man, I tell people all the time, you get a bunch of us in a room with a bunch of kids and you'll see a bunch of gummy bears. I mean, we may on the inside, we may act like a grizzly, but you're around kids and you just become a gummy bear. I mean, the kids are.
Great analogy. And if you've seen any of the pictures from where me and the long range recon and some of the other guys went down to Mexico, the second we found an orphanage, it was a room full of gummy bears.
Yep. And it is. I mean, I'll tell you what, like when I'm at the church working with, there's sometimes I'll go in there and work with the kids. I'll work with the, third, fourth, fifth graders, stuff like that, second. And for that 2 hours that I'm there, I'm not thinking about anything.
Yeah.
There's no racing thoughts. The trauma's not there. I'm not thinking about, the guys that I've lost. I'm just enjoying the moment with these kids. And it's funny, you bring that up with the kid aspect. I'm working with a 14-year-old right now who has, a couple of attempts under her belt. Her dad's a vet. And, it's just one of those things where when I first heard about it, I couldn't help but jump in. I knew she was a daughter of a vet. And to me, that's just, I don't care what branch you served in. I don't care what time period you served in. I don't care what your MOS was. You're a brother. And if that brother's child is in need, that's when we jump in.
Yeah. Hey, Ben, if you would share with those listening live and on with us right now, the mission of Flanders, just going to give an update to what it is that you feel called to do, how you serve those that have served us, and some of the work that you're currently embarking on with some men and women outside of Jonathan. In addition,
absolutely. So Flanders, our mission is to take broken vets and make them whole again. And that is a broad and all-encompassing way of saying that we do things exactly like Jonathan just mentioned. If we find a vet that has a need, we try to do everything we can to get that need met. Now, our charter is for homeless and addicted vets. So we only spend our dollars on those efforts, but we have a pretty wide network of people that can address any number of things going on. So, my primary focus is getting vets off the streets, getting them into treatment, and getting them into sober living houses. But we also, we go help trafficked women, whether they're veteran or not. We just talked about Mr. Pink, who's over in Ukraine dealing with unexploded ordnance and teaching the Territorial Defense Forces how to do the same. He's actually assembled a pretty badass team of experts over there now. He's also in recovery. Jonathan and I, if you paid attention, we're both in recovery, former alcoholics. The guy we've got over there is in recovery. So the overarching mission, as we get vets who were once broken and we make them whole again, is to plug the ones who are ready and willing into these, world-changing volunteer opportunities, which is really important, because the whole thing goes back to service. Jonathan mentioned selfless service. That's the reason anybody enlists to begin with, or commissions. You want to serve something bigger than yourself. And I think for a lot of vets struggling with addiction, or just who have lost their way, it goes back to not having a life of purpose. And for me, and from what I've seen for a lot of us, it's finding that life of service again gives you purpose, living for something bigger than yourself. So in a nutshell, that is Flanders' mission.
Yeah. Well, we appreciate you being on mission. We want to encourage those that are listening in to go to the website and check out the work that they're doing, flandersfields.org. And, of course, support. You have a need that you had a vision to meet the need, and you have a game plan to do that. But it takes capital and cash flow to making sure that you can do what you do. I'm not making a commercial pitch, just saying, if you want to learn more about Flanders Fields, it's flandersfields.org. Of a gift of any amount, but specifically, there's a campaign called Friends of Ben. And if anybody feels called to jump in and be a Friends of Ben for 1,000 or more to help serve men and women like Jonathan, we just appreciate all that you're doing. So, Ben, Jonathan, there's a lot of other vets out there like yourselves. How vast is it in the landscape of America that have a very similar story? How vast is it? What's the landscape?
That's a great question. And that's really the reason I wanted to bring Jonathan on. Compared to him, I am barely even a vet, but our lives have mirrored each other in so many ways. And I think it goes back to this personality type. The whole kids in a room analogy or example really highlights that. There's just a personality type that a lot of veterans have. And so I think this story, while it may vary in the minutia, it's pretty much the same for an overwhelming swath of vets.
Mm-hmm. Hundreds of thousands out there that have that same life experience. And it makes sense when you think about it. Most people that enter into the service that I've encountered are doing so because of that, natural higher calling. And that goes hand in hand with the type of people that turn into gummy bears, right? Those are part and parcel of the same thing. But what's important for all of us here at Flanders to do is to figure out how we, as the rest of the nation, right? I'm not a vet, but as a beneficiary of their sacrifice, and figure out ways that we can give back. And giving back is probably cliche at this point, one of the most overused terms in veteran fundraising, but it's really pertinent to today's example when we have so many of our veterans and even active service members that struggle with undiagnosed traumas, self-esteem issues, right? You think about all the ways that all those things come back and get to the root of the problem. We're here to make sure that they have the resources that they need and that we can start to stem the loss. 22 a day is a staggering number, but it's not inclusive, right? When you dive in the numbers, Ben, what are the real numbers?
So they just recently did a deep dive on that. And when you add in deaths that were very clearly self-inflicted, but not necessarily, putting a bullet in your head, like drunk driving deaths and stuff like that, they're looking at like 44 a day veterans commit suicide. Active duty numbers are pretty bad too, but what they're not catching is accidental overdose, long-term alcoholic deaths. They're still very much self-inflicted. I mean, I think in reality, we're probably losing somewhere between 50 and 75 vets a day to a death caused by their own hand in some fashion. And I think a lot of that goes back to, and Jonathan, don't feel pressured to agree with me on this. I'm curious if you do, though. A lot of that goes back to just an overwhelming number have this void that they're trying to fill somehow, right? And for me, I filled it with alcohol, I filled it with heroin, I filled it with women. I tried everything I possibly could to fill that void. And what I've discovered through my journey with Flanders is that it's actually service that really fills that void and keeps it full. Jonathan said something a minute ago about his head stopping, his brain stopping and slowing down when he's around kids. That's that void being full when you're clear and when it goes away and you're not thinking a million miles an hour. What's your take on that, Jonathan?
You nailed it right there on the head, bro. You really did. It is that filling that void, and it like, man, I was just having a conversation with a vet that I'm working with. You know, we do these things. We turn to the pills, we turn to the drugs, we turn to the alcohol, we turn to those what I call them sinful pleasures. You know, I'm not a pastor yet, but you know, we turn to those things because they're quick feel goods. You know, I mean, on a lighter note, it wasn't quick to get me drunk, so it would take a while. And in between that, as I'm progressing up, you know, there's those bad decisions that come in. You know, the women, the drugs, all this other things, you know, because we need that instant feel good, right? As humans, we want, it's that immediate gratification. We're not patient when it comes to that. So when we're turning to those things, you know, it's doing. I mean, I say it all the time. We're putting Band-Aids on gunshot wounds.
Yeah.
We're not diving into the problem. And you mentioned active duty. Now I'm attacking active duty for the simple fact, because that's where the problems start. And that's when they get pushed out. I mean, I'm working with a vet right now who is getting medically discharged for PTSD. So it's, instead of fixing the problem, we're going to throw a Band-Aid on the problem. And then now it becomes the VA's issue, which we all know how well the VA loves taking care of us. You know, now there are some good places out there where we can do that, but you know, wrapping back around to what you said, Ben, it's just one of those things where I have worked and I have been around thousands of vets that's our go-to. You know, it's just that self-inflicted, whether it be immediate with a bullet to the dome, or 10 years of just drinking vodka, you know, for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, you know, by the pint. It's all self-inflicted, and we're not.
And the results the same.
Yeah, end results.
So on that slightly depressing note, let's continue with the depressing side of this. So you mentioned PTSD. It's almost impossible to get into that without discussing moral injury. You also talked about a deployment to Afghanistan. You know, we're just a little over a year from Afghanistan being handed back to the Taliban. And, you know, everybody that follows me knows how involved we were with the evacuation, how involved we still are with advocacy. Jonathan, as a vet that served in Afghanistan, how does the entire collapse, the retreat, the retrograde, how does that affect you on the moral injury side? What feelings did that leave you with?
A spineless leadership. I hate to say it. And it left a huge, it put a huge hole in my heart. I always tell people, out of all my deployments, Afghanistan was the worst and the best one. It was the worst because of everything that we went through, the people that we lost. I mean, that area, we controlled the BSE where I was at. I mean, we had cats getting hit with anti-tank mines. We were going into villages, helping these people. And to see the way we left, like our interpreters, the men that fought alongside of us. I still remember all 4 of my interpreters over there. Love those guys. But it really left. I'll tell you what, that was a dark time, because I was pissed. Clear, I was sober per se, but it left that one really pissed me off. I couldn't. Yeah. It was one of those things where if I saw it on the news, if I heard people talking about it, my blood pressure went from 0 to 1,000 with a snap of a finger. You know, I couldn't do it. I couldn't be around it. I didn't want to listen to it. If I saw it on the news, I'd change the channel. It was just, and it kind of, you know, for cats that have been there and that know what it's like and that have experienced it, as I'm doing research and talking with hotlines, because I'll talk to the people. Like I've called the veteran suicide line and asked them specifically, are your numbers going up? And they've all told me the same thing. Our phone lines are just jammed right now. You know, it's just, that was a horrible situation.
We've got several Afghans still downrange on this call right now. Just so everybody listening is aware of that. It's a calling that I don't think any of us are going to abandon. You know, we shifted into Afghanistan as Flanders because we have countryless vets, which are very much homeless. But you know, we were also, this is my business partner on Black Rifle side, so we got pulled into the collapse in July of last year on the data side, and an interesting thing happened in August during the non-combatant evacuation operation. Flanders was just getting a name for doing what we were doing, you know, getting vets into treatment. And a guy that I was talking with, it was on August 15th, or maybe the next day, as the Taliban had just gotten to Kabul. He's like, you know what, dude? And sorry for my French, I'm going to say what he says. I don't give a fuck about myself anymore. Get my turf out of Afghanistan, and I'll stop drinking. Which I laughed because of how preposterous that sounded. Obviously, he was not ready to stop drinking, and he had an excuse already ready. We were able to get that interpreter out, and I have not heard from the veterans since. But it highlights something. That is the kind of dedication guys who served over their head to their allies downrange. And for us to be forced into a situation where the entire nation is supposed to just ignore what happened is unconscionable. We could have an entire, 3-hour podcast about this very topic, I'm sure. But I did want to bring it up because the moral injury of what's happening today, that started last year, is sending a lot of it sideways. You mentioned the suicide hotline. A good friend of mine, Colonel Scott Mann, said something about the numbers have gone up over 90% to the hotlines. And since the collapse of Afghanistan, that's a staggering climb. This is something that has to be addressed. I think a lot of people want to see some sort of accountability and just acknowledge that there's a problem here. And your example about the soldier that's being discharged for PTSD, or I assume soldier, airman, whatever it is, that's getting discharged for PTSD, that I think really speaks to what we're seeing right now. Is there is a lack of accountability. People do want to put Band-Aids on bullet wounds just to say, hey, I did something. And we're not addressing the root problem, which I think right now in the active duty ranks especially is disillusionment, which is really a fancy way of saying moral injury.
And it has far-reaching implications. That we've already talked about, but the things that it's doing today are still alarming. I mean, we've spoken with Marines that were there in Kabul when the bomb went off, and they could be getting better care. I'll put it that way.
Yeah.
They could be getting better care. They're getting from their leadership that you need to suck it up. All the traditional tropes that have led to almost an entire generation of active and retired service members struggling with mental health. And we've got to get that fixed. So we're going to do our part from post-retirement on, but everything we do is helping the same folks. Our mission is to help all service members, active or otherwise, right?
That's right.
So it's very important that we get stories like yours, Jonathan, out there, because the more veterans that hear that, the more veterans that know that, it's okay to not be okay, but let's get you okay. That's where it goes.
I think it's going back to that, that old school mentality, what I call our dad's generations, the suck it up, push on, men don't cry. We don't acknowledge that. And we're still seeing that today, where within the leadership of active duty, you suck it up and you push on. One of the cats that was killed in Kabul was from was from Nebraska. He was from Beaver Lake, and they're out there. They're doing they're dedicating a street to him out there. You know, so that whole that specifically that Kabul impact, right? The effect that it's had on those Marines, the effect that it's had on all those active duty members. You know, I watched Send Me, and you know that one individual who wouldn't allow that plane to take off or whatever, or to be filled. It's dealing with stuff like that, and on why they're not getting that treatment. Now, I will give it to Offutt Air Force Base. They have what's called the Wounded Airman thing, where they're dealing with the PTSD, but they're also pushing people out because of it. You know,
well, and that's a frustrating thing that we're seeing across the board, is that there are anecdotal, or I don't guess that's the right word. There are pockets where things are getting done in the right way, but instead of institutionalizing that and expanding it, it's either getting ignored, or in some cases it's getting shut down. And you know, we talked about the Marines that were at Abbey Gate. That Scott went and met with the 82nd that was working Blackgate, and they're having the same experience. You know, they're not okay. If you watch Send Me and you heard Tim talking about what happened at HKIA, all the women and kids just getting murdered, and they weren't allowed to do anything about it. I mean, that will fuck you up as a human being, having to see that and know that you're supposed to be the good guy and you're not allowed to defend the defenseless, which is what we all enlisted to do. And for, you know, the most part, the Marines, the 2-1 and the 82nd, it's a bunch of kids. I mean, these are young people who have, you know, you talked about our dad's generation, the whole embrace the suck thing. You and I are light years beyond the teenagers that were at HKIA during the NEO, emotionally, because today we've got, well, everything's just very different today than it was when we were growing up, and way different when our dads were growing up. They're not emotionally equipped to deal with this, is what I'm getting at. And, you know, the Kareem, one of the Marines that died at Abbey Gate, you guys have probably seen me talk about it on social media. I've talked with his mom because his older brother committed suicide about 3 months ago, right across from Kareem's memorial. And his older brother, Dakota, was, you know, one of us. He was an addict. Robert mentioned the far-reaching consequences these things are having, and it does. It has a huge ripple effect in the communities. But on the flip side of that, when you can pull a vet who has been struggling out and show them a better path, that also has a ripple effect. And that's what we're seeing right now with Flanders Fields, and what Mr. Pink is a great example of that. What we went and did in Uvalde is a great example of that. You know,
Ben, if you would kind of speak into and share, you know, you connect with someone like Jonathan, whether it be in Memphis or your vision for Atlanta and other cities. What is that journey like? There's probably a range of variables to where someone's at the moment, but you have a starting point and then an objective. The objective is you want them to be clean and to have a successful, fruitful life. But what is that journey like in between?
There's a lot of minutiae that varies from individual to individual. So I'll give you the 30,000 foot view. An ideal scenario, every scenario has to get to the ideal point or it won't work. You can't make somebody else want to stop using ever. So let's say we have a veteran who has bottomed out and says, I want help. Well, we get them help. We get them, depending on the substance, we get them into medical detox first, and then we'll get them into a 28-day treatment program. Let's use Memphis as the example, just because it's where we're best set up. We have 3 sober living houses there that we can get them into. Vets go into those free of charge. They're self-sustaining because we take non-vets who do have to pay rent. So the non-vets pretty much fund everything for the vets, which is a great model and everybody likes it. And we are able to see those vets kind of rise up, ideally as leaders in the houses and in the recovery community. And then as they, you know, get on the other side of their addiction and they're good and stable, we start looking for what kind of volunteer and service opportunities we can plug them into. There's a model Robert's working on right now that begins that service work much earlier in their recovery journey, which I think is going to be critical. And it's really going to drive some of our success metrics, which, you know, are things like recidivism, how long they're staying clean on average, you know, like 3 and 5 year follow-ups. I think those are going to be hugely impacted by Robert's early service model that him and one of our house managers are working on right now. Some of the other ways that we get people who may not be ready to stop using are when they've had their first contact or maybe their 10th contact with law enforcement. Obviously, Jonathan was law enforcement too. There's plenty of law enforcement out there that is aware of us, and sometimes they'll reach out to us when they arrest a vet. And a lot of times the inclination, if it's a vet struggling with alcoholism or addiction, is to give them a pass. And I hate to say this, that's very counterproductive. If you have a true addict or a true alcoholic, giving them a pass just allows them to avoid consequences, which in turn helps them continue in their addiction and hit a much lower bottom. Because for myself, it was the consequences that finally made me have enough and want to do something different with my life. We could also get people referred to us, and frequently do, from drug court, veterans court. So after they've already been to jail, there's a lot of different opportunities we have to offer an extended hand to the vets. Whether or not they grab onto it, though, Steve, that all goes back to, have they suffered enough yet? Are they ready? And fortunately, we have a lot of vets who are nowhere near as stubborn as I was. And they're willing to take that extended hand before they hit the real low bottom that I had to hit before I was ready to do something different.
Yeah, for sure. Well, we've got some folks that are on Zoom with us, but there's a lot of people still on live. FlandersFields.org to go and to support. I've done it. I know a number of other people have done it. Whether you have a donor advised account at the National Christian Foundation or a community foundation, or you just want to go online and say, I'm in. That's really the heart of what it is that you're all talking about and sharing today. I believe that the art of the ask is when we're clear and concise on who we are, what we do, and why we do it. And Ben and Robert and Jonathan, you're a great illustration of an example of someone that Flanders is journeying with. Now the question for us as listeners is, I'm in, how much? And hopefully there'll be some folks that are listening today on Veterans Day to say, we appreciate what you're doing and we want to be in too. So we've got about 5-8 minutes left until we start to wind down our time. Ben, what's some of the final thoughts here as we start to wind up this morning's conversation with Jonathan?
The final thoughts from my side, if we had anybody tune in today that has somebody in their life struggling with addiction, whether they're a veteran or not, addiction, alcoholism, or just living a sideways kind of life, please understand there's nothing you can do or say that is going to change that. They have to suffer enough. And I know this is really hard to hear when you love somebody, to let them suffer, but that's what you've got to do. It's what my parents had to do with me. My mom's watching today, and so she could back me up on this if we could unmute her. But you've got to love them enough to let them hurt, because you can quite literally love somebody to death. There is such a fine line between keeping somebody alive and enabling them that it's really impossible for it not to get blurred. So if you have somebody in your life like that, you need to love them from a distance and let them suffer. I hate to say that, that's the only way they're going to get better. And I would love to hear some closing thoughts from Jonathan as well. We didn't even get into his law enforcement time, or I think we only made 3 or 4 deployments deep out of 10. We need to do this again with him.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So you asked a question about Flanders and stuff. So I'm gonna leave with this. I was turned on to Flanders not only by the mission, but there are plenty of people Vincent Rocco yesterday, I shared a post where, push-ups. The only thing you're going to get with push-ups is a better chest. I'm sorry. We know that there's an issue, but there's those that talk about it and there's those that act upon it. And that's exactly what Flanders does. It's not about talking about an issue. We know there's an issue, but how can we step up and get involved? And Ben, you nailed it on the head. Mm-hmm. You have to let them fall. Mm-hmm. You can't save those that don't want to be saved. And that's one of the hardest things that I had to deal with, especially since I've been on the journey that I'm on. Mm-hmm. Right? I don't count numbers anymore. It's you save the ones you can, is what I say. Is I save the ones that I can, the rest I turn to God. Because at the end of the day, they're not going to listen. They're either going to listen or they're not. You either want the help or you don't. And for me, it was a wake-up call after spending 2 weeks in the hospital after an attempt, where it was, there is a purpose. There's a reason I'm still here. And what that reason is, I've been chasing it. My problem is I was deaf to what I was being called to do. You know, so there's a time to talk and there's a time to take action. And it doesn't matter whether you're dealing with a loved one or just a stranger on the street. If they want the help, they're going to get it. But sometimes you have to fall on your ass and you have to be in the worst place in your life before you realize that I just can't do it on my own anymore. And there is absolutely nothing wrong. And I hate that mentality of if I talk about it, if I ask for help, it makes me weak. And to which I respond to, not talking about it just makes you weak. Mm-hmm. Not asking for that help. We all need help. Mm-hmm. It's not about a handout. It's about a hand lifting up and bringing that person back and restoring the hope. You have to give somebody like us a sense of purpose, and you have to give them a mission. And that's exactly what Flanders does. I mean, you take Mr. Pink, for example, lost his way, recovery, got sober, fought his ass off to better himself, and is now in a place where he can actually make a difference, in a place where everybody's running out. He's running back in, knowing the effects of what he's about to see. He's already suffered that. He's already seen that. And he's selflessly putting himself back in hell, knowing damn well what the consequences could be. But the difference is he's now surrounded himself by people who will motivate him to continue to fight, who won't let him down, and who will always have his six. You know, that's the biggest thing. That's the biggest mission. Restoring hope, restoring that purpose. So you restore that hope, you give them that purpose again, you save a life.
Yeah. Amen.
And not only do you save one life, you save a lot more, because when they've got that purpose again,
trickle
they're gonna be chasing life saving like they were chasing dope before. And we see that time again. I mean,
it is really infectious.
Yeah, this isn't just like a one-off that's happened. But yeah, Jonathan, you hit the nail on the head. That's why we do what we do.
Hey Ben, why don't we start to wrap up with this? Is you know, your story, your heart's been shared, the mission of Flanders Fields. There's still a lot of work to do. Cast vision. Just take a couple of moments and just kind of cast vision. What are you wanting to accomplish and achieve? You've got efforts in Memphis. We have a vision for Atlanta. Kind of cast the vision. Take a couple of minutes on the big picture, and then we'll start to wind down. And I want to hear from both of you on to what is it that gets you two both jacked up every day to be on the front lines doing what you're doing. But cast that little vision. Give us an insight to what the ideas are for Flanders.
So yeah, like you said, we're looking at, you know, our phase one project has been focused on Memphis, Atlanta, and then the DC Metro. Okay. And what we're doing now is establishing the sober living facilities. We've got 3 houses in Memphis. We're looking to build similar setups in Atlanta and DC and build the same partnerships that we've been able to create, and essentially build a playbook so that this sustainable nonprofit model can expand into every municipality where it needs to be, which, based on the research I've done, is almost every one of them. So we're looking to give you an idea of where donations go right now. They're going into acquiring, rehabbing, or constructing the facilities, to getting the personnel in place, the certifications that are needed in order to become the right sort of treatment providers and counselors that these operations need. So we're building those things up, and then we've got a phase 2 and phase 3 for after that. In concert, the follow-on action to each one of these phases is to then develop more than just sober living, right? Because recovery, as anybody who's in the program will tell you, is a lifelong process. Mm-hmm. So we want to build the community and the team, the esprit de corps that you find in the military and no other place on earth. We want to get a little bit of that magic into our communities so that once you become a Flanders House graduate, you don't just move on with your life. You're coming back all the time. You're the one that's going back into the fire to reach for the next person. And the more we do that, the more multiplicative, the faster everything grows. And that's our vision.
So there's obviously capital for housing, and then there's the operational cost. Kind of a ballpark number. What is it if somebody's led to, whether it be Flanders Fields as you need it, Friends of Ben, wherever the capital comes in, you use it as you feel called? Or what if somebody says, I want to support a vet or someone in the program, or 5 or 10? What's that number?
So the numbers are, the way you support it on a vet by vet basis is by actually feeding into the housing operations, right? Because the housing, those operations to be part of that self-sustaining model. Yeah. Once they're in place, they support the veterans in the community, right? So when you think about, what does it make sense to donate? My answer is going to be whatever is comfortable for you. We have a lot of different options, but there are monthly recurring options, which are great, right? Because then that becomes a steady feed that maybe is not a big impact on your wallet right now, but over time can make a real big impact on somebody's life. Yeah. So we've got donors out there that are donating $10 a month. We've got donors that are donating $5,000 a month. We've had single donors in the 6-figure range. But I think if you want to think about it in terms of a goal, right, ours is about $500,000 to set up a region. Mm-hmm. And once we have those in place, again, the funds that come in help grow the footprint of that region.
Yeah.
Yeah, so based on the geography, about $500,000 per city. I think Memphis cost us $575, and now it's self-sustaining more or less. We got some rehab that needs to be done in the houses. But if you just want to think about this in terms of numbers, let's talk about a city where we don't have anything. Like, let's say we have a vet in Phoenix, Arizona. I just picked a random place. About $600 a month keeps a vet housed. Okay. And we do help them get jobs so they can provide their own food. But it's about $600 a month on average keeps a vet housed for a month.
Got it. So we can be, as a supporter, whether it be $100 a month goes to a percentage of that, or somebody might feel called to do $600 a month or $6,000 a month, depending on wherever they are. So thank you. Ben, Robert, how can we be praying for you? And what is it that keeps you both jacked up every day to do what you do? Robert, maybe you can go first, and then Ben, you can close us out.
I'd say, first off, this guy, right? Like, if I think about, the inspiration that I get, the story, every time I think about it, I've known Ben for years at this point, and every day he continues to surprise and inspire. He should be dead, right? There's no two ways about that. He should be dead. But he's not. And there's a reason for that. And his calling is to go out there and help those that need to find a path out of hell. And at this point, my calling is to support that. Mm-hmm. And it is a perennially motivating cause, because every time you reach out and you have that positive impact, it's, like I said earlier, it's infectious. You can't let it go. You got to go get more of it.
Awesome.
I love that. So Robert was actually present when I took my very last drink of alcohol, and I came into his life when I was on a good run, like doing pretty good. So he didn't really have a clue how bad I was, and then he saw it, and we talked. And anyway, pray for the right people to come into our lives. We didn't really have time to get into the God aspect of this call, but everything we do is God ordained. We have no doubt about that. So pray for more folks like Jonathan's uncle, Adam Coffey, put him in touch with us. And that was a God-sent relationship right there. We need more folks like that coming to the table who have walked the same fires we walked out of and can walk back into them with us. That's what we need. I said it earlier in the call, I'm not unique. I'm not special. There are plenty of Bens out there. We just need to find them. And we need the Roberts and the Steves too. So pray for strength, pray for guidance, pray for knowledge of his will and the strength to carry that out. That's three of the things I like to pray about often. Mm-hmm. And then what keeps me going, Steve? Dude, this is what keeps me going, right? This isn't how I make a living. We make a living from Black Rifle. That pays my bills, but this is what keeps me between the rails, getting out there and doing casework, whether it's virtually with Jonathan or out on the streets in Memphis or Atlanta or wherever I find myself, even out of the country. That's what keeps me going. That's what gets me out of bed in the morning. And it's what makes all the time away from my family worth it is the ones we win. To Jonathan's point a minute ago, we can't look at what we lose because we're not going to save them all. We know that. But go ahead.
I was just going to say, to feed on what you're all saying, what we're all saying is in our hearts is that this hopelessness leads to this darkness. But we know and recognize that when we have Christ within our lives, we have a relationship with God, now we're hopeful. And that's really what it is that you're wanting to bring. You're serving as we are here, but it's that spiritual relationship with God and with Christ is really what you're desiring.
Yeah.
Yep. Nailed it.
Sure. Hit the nail on the head.
Awesome. Well, we certainly pray and hope for continued success. And really the ask is not of me to you listening, but rather if you have felt that there's been something in this conversation that has led you to say, I'm in, I want to be a part of this mission, FlandersField.org, please do reach out to Ben and Robert or myself. We just appreciate that you've all taken 50 minutes to be with us this morning. We'll continue. But Jonathan, thank you for your service. Robert, Ben, thank you for your service and all that you're doing. And we just wish and bless everybody to have a great day. When you see a veteran, thank them for their service. And we look forward to being back together again sometime soon. Ben, closing comments as we wrap up?
Steve, thank you so much for pushing us to do this. Jonathan, thank you so much for your time. I want to make a habit of doing this like weekly. This has been fun. Yeah, I'd love to have you back on and do another hour next week, Jonathan.
I think this is going to be a Friday Stories with Ben.
Yeah, I think it's there's something to this.
Yeah. Awesome. Hey, thank you all. Have a great day. Appreciate you.
All right, brother. Thank you. Everybody tuning in. Thank y'all.
Yes, thank you.